Geopolitical and economic analysis. The Middle East crisis and its global repercussions. Introduction. The outbreak of military operations in the Middle East, primarily involving the United States, Israel, and Iran, has plunged the global economy into a new era of uncertainty. This conflict, centered on critical zones for global energy supply, has sent shockwaves through markets, exacerbated geopolitical tensions, and redefined the balance of power. This analysis examines the political and economic impacts on key actors, the consequences for the oil market and global economy, and explores the crucial role China is called upon to play in de-escalating this complex crisis. 1. Impacts on key actors. The war has had asymmetrical consequences for nations involved. Directly or indirectly, Iran faces immense economic and political pressure, while the United States confronts a strategic quagmire and high economic costs. Israel, though resilient, sees its defense spending skyrocket. Gulf states navigate between destabilization risks and opportunities from rising energy prices. China, meanwhile, faces a threat to its energy security but also sees an opportunity to strengthen its diplomatic influence. Regarding Iran, diplomatic isolation is increasing, with growing internal pressure on the regime. Economically, the country experiences a GDP decline of over 10%. Investment collapse, runaway inflation, and increased dependence on China for oil exports. Regarding the United States, strategic quagmire persists without clear objectives being achieved, leading to loss of credibility and internal political pressure from rising fuel prices before elections. Economically, the direct cost of war exceeds $11 billion in the first week. Gasoline prices have risen over 20%, and financial markets experience significant volatility. Regarding Israel, the alliance with the United States strengthens, but the risk of protracted conflict remains. Defense spending has doubled from 4.5% to 9% of GDP. With short-term economic resilience but vulnerability in prolonged conflict. Regarding Gulf states, regional destabilization accelerates with alliance realignment, notably Saudi Arabia versus UAE rivalry. Oil production and exports are disrupted, but revenues increase due to higher prices. However, investments and tourism face significant risks. Regarding China, China sees an opportunity to position itself as a mediator and responsible power. In contrast to the United States, however, the threat to its energy security is real. As 50% of imported oil comes from the Middle East, China nevertheless has absorption capacity, thanks to strategic reserves and diversification. 2. The oil market and global economic crisis. The epicenter of the global economic crisis lies in the Strait of Hormuz, a strategic passage through which nearly 20% of the world's oil and 20% of liquefied natural gas transit. Iran's blockade threat and maritime traffic disruptions have caused oil prices to surge, with Brent crude exceeding $100, compared to around $65 to $70 before the conflict. This volatility has direct impact on the global economy. Rising energy costs fuel inflation, reduce household purchasing power, and increase production costs for businesses. Asian economies, highly dependent on Gulf hydrocarbon imports, are particularly vulnerable. For Europe, already weakened, the risk of stagflation shock, a combination of economic stagnation and high inflation, reminiscent of 1970s oil shocks, has become a major concern. The Iran conflict and its Middle East repercussions generate a negative supply shock for the global economy through energy supply disruption and price increases, reviving fears of another sharp inflation surge. 3. The American quagmire. Military intervention in the Middle East appears to have placed the United States in a difficult situation, described as a quagmire. Initial objectives, whether neutralizing Iran's threat capacity or triggering regime change, have not been achieved. Rather, American action has inadvertently served Iranian and Russian interests by driving up oil prices, a financial windfall for these sanctioned nations. Domestically, consequences are devastating. Over 20% increase in pump fuel prices is an extremely sensitive political factor, particularly approaching parliamentary elections. This situation weighs heavily on the Trump administration, accused of failing to anticipate the economic consequences of a Strait of Hormuz blockade. The snowball effect on the global economy, with growth slowdown and inflationary pressure, further weakens America's international position. 4. China's pivotal role. Facing this chaos, China emerges as an indispensable actor. As the world's largest oil importer and Iran's primary economic partner, absorbing nearly 90% of its crude exports, Beijing has vital interest in regional stability. The crisis directly threatens its energy security and supply chain continuity. Consequently, China is compelled to adopt an active role to curb escalation, leveraging its strategic partnership with Iran, formalized through a $400 billion investment agreement over 25 years, and cordial relations with Russia. Beijing possesses unique influence over Tehran's political decisions. Chinese diplomacy actively positions itself as mediator, capitalizing on its success in mediating Iran-Saudi Arabia rapprochement in 2023. This situation creates a geopolitical paradox. The United States, caught in its own trap, might be forced to quietly seek China's intervention to calm matters, avoiding offense to President Trump's pride. Such cooperation could open the way to easing American trade barriers against Chinese goods, offering a negotiated exit to this multifaceted crisis. Conclusion. The current Middle East war has highlighted the deep interconnection between geopolitical dynamics and the global economy. Energy price surge, stagflation threat, and American strategic quagmire have created a volatile and dangerous situation. In this context, China, through its economic position and diplomatic ties, holds significant keys to conflict resolution. Its capacity to act as a stabilizing power will be not only a test of its global leadership ambition but also a necessity to preserve an economy on the brink. This crisis's outcome could well redraw alliances and power balances for years to come.